We do have new polling data out from the NAACP, which actually finds that Donald Trump's support among black men under the age of 50 is dwindling, dropping from 27% when they asked this same question in a survey last month to now 21%. In the meantime, Kamala Harris's support among this bloc has jumped from 51% to 59% over that same time frame. So for more on what's really going on here with this important demographic, we turn to Derrick Johnson, the president of the NAACP. Thank you so much for being with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. There's just a week left to go to change the minds of black men, of black voters in general. What are you seeing in real time?
Well, it is the trend of what happens during this stage of the election cycle. After Labor Day, people slowly begin to pay more attention, the average voter. The closer we get to the election day, we are finding, as we've always found, that as people pay attention, they educate themselves around what's important. This election isn't about the individual candidates. It's not even about the political parties. It's about the public policy priorities. And the more young African-American voters, particularly those who are under 50, get factual information about what's at stake, we're beginning to see a shift, a gradual shift towards Vice President Harris. It was to be expected because during this period of time, this is what always happened. But it's really important that those voters are spoken with, they're listened to, and as they understand the value and the importance of their vote.
Director Johnson, it's good to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. You know the narrative that we heard over the summer, to your point, before Labor Day, although a little bit after. The story was that young men of color were gravitating toward Donald Trump, that this was a Republican nominee that was accomplishing something that the GOP was not used to, making inroads with a community that was typically not favorable to the Republican candidate or the nominee in this case. Does he deserve some credit as a Republican for crossing those lines to break through with young black men?
Well, embedded in your question is if that was a factual statement. I have heard over the last 5 election cycles about this drifting of core Democratic voters in one direction as a result of some strategy from the Republican Party. I recall hearing it in 2000 and 2004 as it relates to the Latino community. I can recall hearing some of the same narrative around the African-American community, broadly speaking, particularly 2012 and 2016, but especially 2016. And so that's a narrative that's great for media consumption, but I have yet to find any factual basis for much of the narrative. The polling we did is a random sample, and originally it was a question around voters under 50 who are African Americans who felt no one was speaking to them. They're not being heard, and the importance of their vote. But as you close the timeline past Labor Day, as voters are spoken to, they are being heard, and they understand the impact and importance of their vote. As it relates to the public policy issues that are on the table, we begin to see the natural shift as we have identified in our poll. And polling is only a snapshot in time. This was early October. Now we've analyzed the poll. Considering what happened last week, and particularly Sunday, there's even a greater shift, I would predict.
Well, as you allude to Sunday, there obviously were a number of racist remarks made at the Madison Square Garden rally for Donald Trump, not necessarily by the former president, but by many of those who spoke before him. What do you make of where we are rhetorically right now, Derrick, and what this signals about the way the country can move forward toward the advancement of all people, colored people included?
Well, we've gone from the loss of civility in our public discourse around viable candidates to the loss of supporting the importance of democracy. What we witnessed on Sunday was a show of fascism. You know, I just completed Robert Caro's book on LBJ, and he talks about the Nazi gathering in the 30s as a backlash to New Deal policies. And what he describes in his book and what I've seen that took place at Madison Square Gardens is very similar. You're talking about appealing to the lowest common denominator around the racial construct and ethnic background across the board. That has nothing to do with strengthening our democracy or the traditional debates around the role of government and taxing. That is about creating a space of otherizing whole communities and dehumanizing people in general.
It's interesting. We heard from J.D. Vance, of course, Donald Trump's running mate on this, and he is obviously taking a different tact than you are in this case, Director Johnson. We're just getting this ready because he was asked about it and spoke to some of the offensive rhetoric that we heard at Madison Square Garden, remembering that he was there. He had a speaking role in this 5-hour rally, and even though he claims he didn't hear this joke, he reacted to the overall criticism. Here he is.
And my own view on this is, look, again, I haven't seen the joke. Maybe it's a stupid racist joke, as you said. Maybe it's not. I haven't seen it. I'm not going to comment on the specifics of the joke. But I think that we have to stop getting so offended at every little thing in the United States of America. I'm so over it.
Just want you to react to that, Derrick Johnson, that we're too easily offended at every little thing in the United States of America.
Deny its existence, diminish its impact, pivot back to the message, and then carry on with the message of otherizing individuals, demeaning communities, and trying to create a space where white supremacy exists. It was the same thing during the debate, that you use 3 strategic tactics. You call out xenophobia, they're taking our jobs. You put a racialized lens on it, those Haitians, and then you create a reality where you say these individuals are not even human by saying they're eating our dogs and cats. It's a strategy that's tried and true where you otherize communities to try to prop up and motivate a base to vote against all of these impending, not subhuman individuals who are taking something from us. And then when you get caught in that, you deny it existed, you try to marginalize its impact, and then you pivot back to your message.
So that's the messaging we're hearing from one side. Derrick, we'll hear more messaging, the closing argument as it's being billed from Kamala Harris tonight at the Ellipse here in Washington. What does she need to say to black voters?
Well, I don't think it's one side versus the other side in this case. It's those who support democracy and celebrate the diversity that we have grown into being. I recall being in school and we talked about America as a mixing pot. And it brings in ethnic groups and racial diversity from around the globe. Even former President Reagan talked about that we celebrate our diversity, that you could be Eastern European, you can be Catholic or Jewish, but once you become an American citizen, we're all Americans. And that was the 1980s Ronald Reagan. Unlike anyone else, they say this is the leader of the party. He's the shining example, and they have departed so far from that example. This evening, I would only think that the vice president would speak to all Americans to talk about the strength about democracy, the need to protect our democracy as we look forward to a future that's inclusive, productive, and continue to lead this globe as the leading democracy, and doing so without tearing anybody down and maligning any particular individual or community.
We've only got about 30 seconds left, sir. Will Kamala Harris enjoy the same level of support from black Americans that Joe Biden did in 2020?
I believe that Americans will turn out to the polls, especially black Americans, to support what could potentially be the first African and East Asian president female of this country.
We appreciate your sharing the new polling info with us. Stay in touch with us. Derrick Johnson, of course, President, CEO of the NAACP.